Welcome back to In Business. Do you feel you're being harassed by the Canada Revenue Agency for some tax issue? Maybe you have fallen behind in your HST, source deductions, or income tax remittances. What are your rights, and who can you turn to when the fight begins? To help us with the discussion is the very popular CRA slayer, Paul DioGuardi. If you'd like to join the conversation, you can call us at 905-848-5483. That's 905-848-LIVE. Welcome back, Paul. Good to see you again.
Glad to be here.
Coming in to chat with us about CRA issues. The last time you were here, we talked about the kinds of businesses that seem to get drawn into the fray, that are more popular that way. We touched on the kinds of things that get people into trouble. Tonight, let's touch on the bankruptcy side of things. Because when people get backed into a corner and they owe money to the government, and they owe money to creditors, that part goes through their mind. Well, maybe I should just declare bankruptcy and everything will go away. So when it comes to owing money to the CRA for tax and HST and all the other stuff, how likely is it to go bankrupt and not owe them a dime?
Well, you've got to be very careful what you do, because just going bankrupt may still leave you vulnerable. For example, let's say you get a situation where you haven't filed for a number of years. Going bankrupt, you can get a discharge, but then they can prosecute you for failure to file. That doesn't stop that. So you've got to do a plan. So normally what we do is we get people in that situation. I try to talk to the person. I look at the person as if I'm sitting in his chair across from the desk. I say, okay, what are your assets? What are your liabilities? Are you a candidate for a proposal? Now, a proposal is not a bankruptcy, especially if you're under $250,000, which most people are, because then if it's refused, you don't automatically go bankrupt. You see? So in other words, you take a run at the CRA. But before you do that, you got to plan a strategy, because you don't just walk into these things. A lot of people, they listen to the trustees' ads. Oh, come on in and see us. We're your friends. We're going to help you out. But the problem is, they're good people. I'm not running anybody down. They're good people.
Yep.
But they are working both for the creditors and the debtors.
Yeah.
So they're not disinterested. And they'll get paid more if they collect more for the creditor, read the CRA. So before you speak to a trustee, you've got to do a plan. You've got to sit down. And you know what? If you pay a lawyer to sit down, you're using money that the creditors are not going to get anyway. So you might as well cover your butt.
Yeah.
So what I normally do is I sit down with people and say, look, what do you got? What is it you want to protect? How about the house? Let's look at the family house.
Right.
Is there a way we can protect the house? Now, sometimes there is. Sometimes we can do a restructuring in such a way that, let's say they're after the husband, that the wife can keep the house. And I usually say, look, if the man comes in, I say, look, bring your wife in, or your girlfriend, bring her in, or your companion, and let's talk about how maybe we can save the house. You don't do that after you speak to the trustee or sign up with the trustee, because once you sign with the trustee, it's like you're in handcuffs. You can't do much. So you've got to figure it out ahead of time what you're doing.
On that point, let's say you have a house.
Yeah.
And you transfer it, and now you're in trouble with the CRA, and you transfer it to your spouse, your partner. Is that now out of the hands of the CRA,
no.
or can they still attach it?
That's the most common mistake people make, and they go to they'll go to their real estate lawyer and say, transfer my interest in the house to my wife. Their real estate lawyer should warn them, but a lot don't know, because lawyers don't all know tax. There's a section of the Act, it's called Section 160, it's their atomic weapon, okay? Because, well, what they do is they'll trace assets are transferred. Let's say you owed $50,000 to the government, and you're joint tenants with your wife in the house. You say, oh, I'm going to transfer my interest to my wife because I've got to protect the house. Well, your wife then becomes responsible for your tax debt, so you don't want to do that.
So when you transfer the house, you're transferring the debt as well?
Well, what they're doing is they follow through, because they're saying you basically took the money that should have been paid to us and you gave it to your wife.
Yeah.
Therefore, she's now responsible for your tax debt up to the benefit she got. So maybe what you want to do in the restructuring is say, okay, how can we do a legitimate transaction whereby the wife can acquire the interest in the house of the tax debtor and pay for it at a reasonable amount, give the money to the tax department. Then they're closed out, you see, because then she's got the house, or he has the house, depending on who the debtor is.
Right.
Today, a lot of women are
Sure, women are starting 4 to 5
in the
businesses
same
these
position.
days. Right.
But basically, the first thing I look at is how to save the family nest. And if a man comes in alone, I say, come back and bring your wife. We want to talk, because she and you have to have a game plan that you're prepared to follow. And I've only had, in all the years of practice, close to 50 years of practice, I've only had a wife once say to me, no, I'm not going to help my husband, let him sink. Well, it has happened. I was so surprised. I said, well, I'm glad I called you in, because I figured...
At least you know where you stand now.
He just, his face fell. She said, and I couldn't do any planning, so I had to do the best that I could do without her assistance.
We're talking with Paul DioGuardi, the CRA tax slayer. If you have a question for Paul, or a comment, or a horror story you'd like to share with us, give us a call at 905-848-5483. That's 905-848-LIVE. Paul, you mentioned at the very beginning about putting a plan together if you haven't filed for a while. Does it matter if you declare bankruptcy and you're discharged, and then you you haven't filed for 5 years or 7 years, and then you file the tax returns, and now you create the now you've got a bunch of tax money that you owe? I guess that becomes new debt. Is that right?
You want to do it? No, the debt is there, but the thing is, you want to file for the reason you want to file is you want to get away from the possibility that they can prosecute you, because failure to file a tax return for more than 1 year if you owe taxes is a criminal offense. By declaring bankruptcy and getting a discharge doesn't mean that they can't go after you criminally.
Okay.
So what could happen is you get a discharge, and suddenly somebody says in Revenue Canada, why don't we make an example out of David? Let's go after him. Suddenly you get a summons to appear in court, and you say, well, I'm not a criminal, and the fact is you haven't filed your tax returns, so you are guilty. The judge will say to you, David, did you file your tax returns? No, I'm filing them now, but you didn't before you got the summons. Guilty. Boom, you got a criminal record.
Now, what if I don't owe any tax? Do I still have to file?
Yes, you do have to file, but then if you don't owe tax, they wouldn't prosecute you because there's no tax owing. So, but they could prosecute you for failure to file. They could still prosecute you, but they probably wouldn't.
Is it always a good idea to file every year, whether you have tax owing or not? At least then you're on the record that at least I filed?
Yes, because they can prosecute you for failure to file or declare all your income, but they can't prosecute you for not paying your taxes. So it's a different situation when you're not paying your taxes. Again, there's a number of ways you can work your situation and put yourself in the best sweet spot that you can. I mean, it's always a difficult situation when you owe money to the Canada Revenue Agency, and we get people coming in and they owe sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars, like small business people. They can't survive. Instead of sending in the HST, they use it to keep their business going, or the PST, and they don't send it in. And suddenly they find that they owe huge amounts of money. So they'll come in and we'll say, well, okay, how do I save my business? What can we do? We have to sit down and we work first of all, we work the figures. Will this work? Will that work? We work out a plan. And then you work to the plan. And that's the best way. I mean, nothing is 100%, but it's the best way to get out if you're working to a plan.
And I would imagine that if you find yourself in those situations, the best idea is to start working on the plan before the CRA comes knocking.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. But often people leave it. You see, the big mistake they do is they try to negotiate deals with the Canada Revenue Agency themselves. And what happens is there's always the good cop, bad cop. So the good cop lets you get away for a while, and you're lulled into a false sense of security. And then what happens is the supervisor says, how come this file's been outstanding for so long? Give it to the bad cop. The bad cop's duty is to close the file. So he or she will suddenly get very nasty with you. The person who is so nice, who is like the Walmart greeter, you know, big smile and everything. Suddenly you get Simon Legree after you, and he says, I'm going to close your bank account. I'm going to seize your house. I'm going to put you out of business. And they get very, very rough. And unfortunately, a lot of people wait until that time before they come in to see us.
Well, I tell you, I've dealt with the CRA with clients for a lot of years when I was in public practice. I don't know that I ever ran across one that looked like a Walmart greeter. But we're going to take a short break, Paul. We're going to be back with Paul DioGuardi. We're going to be talking about HST and those remittances and what happens when you get into trouble with those, and do those survive bankruptcy. We will be back with Paul DioGuardi and more in business right after this short break, 1 minute and 30 seconds, and we'll be right back.